International chemical weapons experts are heading to the English town of Amesbury next week to probe the nerve agent poisoning there, which left one person dead and another severely ill. The Watchdog has already confirmed that Dawn Sturgis died from contact with the same type of substance used in March to attack a former Russian double agent and his daughter. However, they still don't know if it was the same batch of poison.
The experts from the Organisation for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons will return to the UK to continue their work to independently confirm the identity of the nerve agent, which resulted in the death of one British national in Amesbury and left another seriously ill.
Presumably, they're going to be able to try to help move the investigation forward. We do know that they'll be collecting further samples. They will be sending those back to OPCW labs and then reporting back to the UK. And of course, this comes as investigators continue to try to piece together what it is exactly that unraveled on June 30th in Amesbury when two British citizens were taken to hospital and treated on suspicions of Novichok poisoning. And of course, one of those people died. And what it is that happened on March 4th when former double agent Sergei Skripal and his daughter Yulia were poisoned, leading to a major international scandal. Because still, as we speak right now today, both of these cases continue to be plagued really with a lack of any tangible findings. Some of the latest details circulating here in the British press have included claims citing sources close to the investigation that police had reportedly identified two suspects in the poisoning, claiming that they were Russians. Those reports even suggested that British authorities are getting ready to ask for those people to be extradited. However, those were very quickly played down. Russia, of course, said that they've received no such request and have talked about the number of speculations that have been flying around involving these cases.
Since the Salisbury incident, there have been no less than 100 reports based on leaks and unnamed sources. That's why we shouldn't rely on this information. We don't trust unconfirmed reports in the media.
Hopefully, with this latest upcoming OPCW visit, more information will be shed on those two cases.
OK, well, let's get the thoughts now of security analyst Charles Schubert, who joins us from the UK. Good afternoon to you, Charles. What do you think the OPCW can achieve then from its visit? What do you expect?
It's a little bit surprising to see this. This is a government announcement today that this visit's going to take place. We knew it would happen, and to some degree we'd already assumed that it had happened. After all, some time has passed since the Amesbury incident back in June. And also, of course, the unfortunate victim of that incident, whatever it turns out to have been, one of them, of course, has been released from hospital, Charlie Rowley. The other one, Dawn Sturgis, sadly died, and she has already had her funeral. And so, therefore, in respect of her, at least, there's no real possibility of having further samples taken. Samples may have been kept from her, and probably have been, of course, but it'll be difficult now, of course, with her passing, to establish any form of independent chain of custody of those samples, which is so important to the integrity of the OPCW sampling and analysis process. So I think what we can expect to see is probably a replication of what we saw when the OPCW became involved in the first case involving the Skripals back in March. They, of course, were able to confirm from their own processes that the analysis and the assessment of the Porton Down scientists in Britain was accurate in terms of this being Novichok. And they, of course, on the side pointed out that this was a very high purity Novichok that was found in the samples relating to the Skripals. Now, the question, of course, that is being asked is whether it's going to be the same batch, whether it's going to be actually linked, this new finding of Novichok, either in the victims in the bodies of these victims, and of course in the alleged bottle that was found at the home of Charlie Rowley by police. That is apparently the container. Now, if it turns out that they weren't linked, that of course would stretch the level of imagination and coincidence really to incredulity in a way, and because that would suggest that there were two separate plots here, or perhaps two sources of Novichok. And therefore, I think even the British government, you've already alluded in your report to the various different leaks and different stories that have come out in the British media. I think even the British media and the British government would be hard-pressed to explain that particular coincidence. And so therefore, what we're expecting, I think, to see is that the OPCW will be able to confirm at least the British findings in the samples there, given that this was the nerve agent, one of the Novichoks involved, and they may be able to confirm that it's the same batch. But they almost certainly, as indeed was the case with the first testing process, it's very unlikely that they are going to do as the British government initially, I think, tried to brief that they would do, and that is they won't be able to, I think, confirm the British government's assertion, an assertion still without any evidence publicly made, that this was the act of the Russian government or of any particular group whatsoever beyond the nature of the chemical itself.
How difficult is it, Charles, to assess whether it did come from the same batch? I mean, I'm no expert, but you would assume you could quickly make the link, couldn't you, if it existed or not?
Yeah, I'm also not a chemical expert, of course, but of course I do know a little bit about investigations. And it would appear, even from a logical perspective, that if the chemical makeup of, you know, let's get put away to one side the idea that something's going to be 100% pure. They did say, the OPCW, that the first set of samples showed a very high degree of purity of Novichok in the samples that they took. But that won't be 100% a sample for sure. And indeed, they didn't claim that. And so therefore, there will be impurities, byproducts and other elements, I'm sure, that will be present in this chemical. And the proportion of those and the nature and identity of those will give some kind of label, some kind of identity mark, if you like, to the whatever it is that they're testing, each individual sample. And if those samples turn out to be identical, then of course I think there's probably going to be a very high probability that they are linked. But really, if we think about the circumstances of the case beyond the chemistry, the chances of them not being linked are so incredibly low that really I don't think people would be expecting them not to be linked. As I say, otherwise it would suggest that there were two separate plots, or at least two separate batches made, and of course one has to ask why that would be. But we have to remember, of course, that there is still inconsistent testimony and alleged evidence in this case. For example, let's not forget that Charlie Rowley, the other victim of the Amesbury case, who's now discharged from hospital and has given one interview, albeit not a live interview, to a selected journalist, he claimed very specifically that whilst he still can't remember where apparently he found this bottle, which he described as a perfume bottle, he very specifically said in this interview that it was a sealed container, that he had to actually assemble the container, that it was wrapped in polyurethane. That means that actually, or would suggest that that was an unused container beforehand. So whilst there's probably two containers around at least, if the story is true, because again, we don't know whether what he has said is true, because as your correspondent correctly pointed out, none of this has been confirmed by the police authorities. So we're really going on what Charlie Rowley himself has said, and of course the incessant leaks, many of which have proved to be untrue from so-called security sources in the British media.
Sure, OK, yeah, a lot of questions remain, don't they? Thanks, Charles. That was Charles Shoebridge, a security analyst there in the UK.